This applied project is aimed at organizing and digitally publishing sources on the history of the All-Ukrainian Museum town. Nowadays, it's the National Kyiv-Pechersk Historical and Cultural Reserve, which is a UNESCO Heritage Site list. For saving time, I'm going to use short name Museum Town or abbreviation from Ukrainian Всеукраїнське музейне містечко ВММ. The appearance of the VMM is a personification of the complex history of Ukraine. I am talking about the political perturbations and social transformations that took place in the 1920s and 1930s. The museum institution arose on the territory of the Kyiv-Pechersk Lavra, one of the ancient 11th century famous and influential monastery on the territory of modern Ukraine. The museum town was founded in 1921 with a quite difficult first name, Lavra's Museum of Cults and Everyday Life. During the first decade, the museum's names as well as its structure changed, and sometimes existed in parallel even several names of museum. The name, but the name All-Ukrainian Museum Town is the most widespread, and also it's very important. Best reflects the feeling of the initiators of its creation. They were Ukrainian scientists, exactly employees of the Ukrainian Academy of Science, and they wanted to make a strong museum institution with a prominent scientific component. Actually, what dictated such idea of Ukrainian scientists? After the capture of the territory of Ukraine by Soviet authority in 1920, except of Ukrainian western part, the decrees of the new government on the nationalization of church and monastery properties came into force. Church libraries, archives, educational institutions, and the theological seminars and the academy were also nationalized. At the same time, the property of secular institutions, private collection, etc., were also nationalized. In an attempt to save at least part of this array of historical and cultural heritage, Ukrainian scientists have helped organize and development protection of monuments organizations. Such organizations collected, assessed, and distribute to the other cultural institutions nationalized heritage. Some museum institutions were also created to preserve and study objects, like it was All-Ukrainian Museum Town. And from variety of institutions and variety of items came into collection of a museum town. The first director of this museum was academician of Ukrainian Academy of Sciences, and the second director of the museum was also employee of academy. Both of them contribute to the accumulation, preservation, and restoration of historical and cultural heritage in this museum, as well as deep scientific studies and its display in museum exhibitions. However, under the increasing pressure of the totalitarian regime, museum institutions were transformed into propaganda tool. Like the museum town turned from actually a museum and scientific institution into a propaganda and anti-religious mouthpiece. Director and researchers were forced to participate in this transformation. At the same time, Soviet authorities got rid of scientists and qualified museum workers. Such museum staff was cleaned from already Soviet museum. Some of them were just fired, some were arrested and then shot. Accordingly, museum experts and scientists were forced to adapt, mimic, and comply with the demands of the new Soviet authorities. Gradually, the Soviet authorities to treat the collected collection more freely. The collection and part of collection were spread at his discretion. For example, transferred to Torksin, the State Bank, and to the other museum and institution of Soviet Union. During the Second World War, museum items were taken out by Nazis and were abroad. Also, not all of items and the museum's accounting documents were returned back to museum after the evacuation during the war. Part of it were obviously lost at the beginning of the evacuation. However, after the return from evacuation, part of collection and documentation, some part of documentation were distributed to different institutions in Kyiv for various reasons. Today, the original All-Ukrainian Museum Town collection is not preserved as a whole collection. Items from it and documents, some documents are stored in different museums, libraries, and archives of Kyiv and Ukraine, as well as in abroad, European countries, Russia. So we think it's relevant to tell about such a complex history of the museum collection, documentation, and people, taking into account different interpretation, context, etc., with the help of the graph based on CIDOC theorem model. The aim of our project is to quickly launch a platform prototype that could aggregate the data on materials from the complex history of All-Ukrainian Museum Town and its collection from various institutions. At this stage, we had oriented on using open source solutions. Provide to the institution where stored items from former museum town collection the minimum necessary materials to determine the relationship of various objects, personalities, etc. The basis should be joint thematic theory to be published on this platform. Conceptual data model was built for define the basic entities which need for their first stage: objects, written sources, actors, events. The next step was specialization of the model based on CIDOC theorem. For quickly prototyping and for approbation of model on test data sets was using WizScheme. At this stage, there were problems with the implementation of the data model in practice. In particular, the well-known problem of realization in RDF properties of properties. For example, it's extremely important for our study to capture the different roles in which different actors performed in different contexts. And one of the existing recommendation on how to overcome it through dictionaries of specialized properties is not suitable for our project tasks. After all, we need to be able to capture additional information about the roles of the relevant context and personality characteristic in these roles. Accordingly, we don't have enough edge we need an additional node of the graph. Therefore, other recommendations prompt us to make this decision. We have specialized the E39 concept of actor contextual reference. This is some conceptual representation of the actor with the two additional properties to E39. It's an indication of the person whose projection he is, and in indication of the role he plays here and now. Therefore, it's possible to capture additional contextual information. There is an example of simple query and a sample of people and roles in which they participate. This approach satisfies our need to identify the roles and different incarnation function of people in those extremely difficult and tragic times. For example, among these museum workers, there were secret agent, I can say agents even, but there was a question, who exactly? Reports signed, of course, by pseudonyms of these agents have been stored in archives of the Soviet secret services. Researching people relationship, the content of documents provide us an opportunity to narrow the searching and to identify the name of the agent. The structure of the platform currently looks like this. The basis was a resource created on the basis of virtual research environment Whisky. Triple store def4g is currently used at the primary data warehouse. A key element of this resource is a thematic theory of personalities, organization, events, of the history of all Ukrainian museum town, published for common use and linking data. Also available as separate but related structural elements are the object image server and the source text server. It was deployed based on their publisher. To expand the function of the platform, additional models are being developed, in particular to ensure data import. For example, important source text with the semantic markup. Also is information about museum object and related data according to the Ukrainian metadata scheme code. Code, it's a cultural object data exchange, Ukrainian metadata scheme. First of all, it's for museum objects. At this stage, we have based on combined all Ukrainian museum materials from several institutions. First of all, it's sure museum items and archival materials from the funds of the National Kyiv-Pechersk Historical and Cultural Reserve. Also, it's institution of manuscripts of the National Library of Ukraine. For example, there are personal and work diaries of curators of former Ukrainian, all-Ukrainian town. Another group of materials are documents from the archives of the Soviet Secret Service. Now it's open archive of the secret services of Ukraine. There are also reflect part of the museum history, people stories, etc. In the future, we hope to expand our project and work with materials from archive, Ukrainian Free University in Munich, for example, or Ukrainian Free Academy of Science in New York, and with the other organizations in Ukraine and abroad. As I said, the collection of former All-Ukrainian town materials and documentation about it and about people were spreading quite widely. Scattered, all of that physical object can be combined through logical connection using digital tools. Thank you so much for your attention.